Morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thanks very much, Heather, and thanks for all of you attending this session and for coming and supporting World Pork Expo. Again, my name's Bill Even. I work for you. I'm your Checkoff CEO, and it's a pleasure to be here this morning with this distinguished panel of folks that have got really good information to share. First, I'm going to start off with a little bit of level setting of some things we're doing here at the National Pork Board or the Pork Checkoff on your behalf, and that's going to tee things up for the panelists. They've got some different presentations. They'll be coming to the podium, and then this is about questions for you in the audience. This is your business, your industry, your money. We want to make sure that this is really deeply engaging and you get the satisfaction and the answers you're looking for. So, first off, I wanted to talk about the National Pork Board key priorities. This was set by our board of directors. We got Al Wolfcool in the room. Al, you want to raise your hand? Al is our treasurer on our board of directors. We got to see Gary Asay, former pork board member. So we've got a couple of folks here from the Checkoff, and these are the folks, the 15-member producer board, that actually set our priorities and set the budget on how we spend your money. As you go across that, the first thing you see is real pork. This is about trust and image. And a lot of what you are telling us is we not necessarily need a whole lot of promotion of pork product or pork as a food that we may have traditionally done, but rather we want to see more of our Checkoff dollars being supporting you as an industry. So rather promoting, less than about promoting pork as a food and about promoting pork as an industry and you as pork producers. The next is African swine fever. We got Dr. Jeff Kaisand here who's going to get into some details of that. And Jeff was actually recently back from the Dominican Republic and Haiti, where there is ASF. And it'd be very interesting to hear your point of view on what we see in some of these countries off the coast of the United States. Next, we've got sustainability. I've got a few comments on that, but Dr. Sara Crawford knows this subject forwards, backwards, ups, down, backwards, inside out, right? So if you've got questions about sustainability, don't be afraid to ask Sara during the open session at the end. We go to the fourth one, that's grassroots engagement. And what that really means is what are we doing to support and engage our states and you as producers? We got a lot of contract growers in the United States now, far different from when the Checkoff was started back in 1985. And if we don't find ways to bring these people into the industry and make them feel part of it, it's going to be to the detriment of our ability to raise pigs and help feed people. The last piece, number 5, is international trade. We export 30% of our production. It's important to note. And this goes back to ASF with Dr. Kaisand. If we get African swine fever, it is a foreign animal disease, and our exports shut off literally overnight. You can imagine what's going to happen in your markets if suddenly 30% of our production was trapped on shore here in the U.S. and we had to lower the prices to a level necessary to move it, sell it, and or eat it. And so that's why all of these issues are so critical for us, that we need to maintain those international markets. So I really want to focus in on the two things that a couple of our panelists are here to talk about today, and that is foreign animal disease prevention and preparedness. When China announced that to the world back in August of 2018 that they had African swine fever in the country, it sent shockwaves around the world. China is home to half the pigs in the world, and we estimate that half of them died. So you think about that, the world literally lost a quarter of its pork production in a disease that is not harmful to us as people. Pork is safe to eat, but it is truly a deadly disease for the animal. But as Jeff would often talk about, it's the pork industry has to work with the state vets, and you have to work with the USDA at the federal level. And it can be the, what do you call it, Jeff, the triangle of triumph or the triangle of terror, that if we're not working and thinking and acting together in a collective action, we're going to be in trouble. And I see that Jeremy, want to raise your hand? From the National Pork Producers Council, a veterinarian with Smithfield Foods. He and Al Wolfcool recently served on a joint industry panel to set some priorities of what we need to do next to make sure we're preparing for and able to prevent and stamp out a disease should it get in the United States. You've got some very passionate producers, very passionate veterinarians, and very passionate staff that are working diligently to knock off what can we do better tomorrow, what can we do better tomorrow. We cannot do that without you. Me standing in the front of the room at a microphone is not going to improve your biosecurity. This is the blocking and tackling and the hard work that needs to happen at a farm-by-farm level. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And you can see the constellation of logos there. We'll have to put the new NPPC logo on the slide that they're announcing today. But it's truly a unified effort. You've got the Swine Health Information Center that has veterinarians and works on a lot of endemic diseases and pays attention also to foreign animal disease. The American Association of Swine Veterinarians here in the 3 o'clock position, that's the nation's swine vets that live this day in and day out. The North American Meat Institute that represents the packing industry, a vital piece of the supply chain, they have to be in alignment with what we're doing on the farms. I mentioned the USDA and the Veterinary Services Division. They will have federal control over the incident because it's a foreign animal regulatory disease. On the 9 o'clock position, you see the U.S. SHIP program, or the U.S. Swine Health Improvement Program. It's a pilot project that both the National Pork Producers Council and National Pork Board are supporting to get off the ground to help do some surveillance of these diseases in peacetime. And I mentioned the National Pork Producers Council are partners in working on this. So again, there's a lot of coordination that needs to happen here. There's a lot of different legal jurisdictions that we need to be cognizant of. Many times state veterinarians, they've got a lot of police powers. Jeff, I don't know what it's like in your state, but I know in South Dakota, Dr. Dusty Otokoven, former state vet from South Dakota, is here. They've got the ability to call out the highway patrol and close the borders and, and manage quarantine areas. So this is serious stuff, and these individuals are tasked with an incredible responsibility on your behalf. And so we have to work with the states and the federal government on this. So one of the things that the Checkoff has done is develop a contact tracing app for pigs called AgView. And I really put it in that fashion. A lot of us learned the hard way during COVID what it means that if someone in your family had COVID and they had to get tested, and could that person go to work? Could they go to school? Could they go to church? Or did they need to stay at home and isolate? Or did you need to quarantine an area if you thought you might have been exposed? The American public and you as pork producers have got a better understanding of what biosecurity looks like and testing looks like now. This is the world we live in the pork industry. And so recognizing that in time of an emergency, the state veterinarians, the state animal health officials need to easily be able to look at an incident and manage where are the pigs going and where are our control areas. So what you see on here is a screenshot of the AgView app. It sits on top of existing systems, right? So if you work with MetaFarms or PigChamp or other companies, they can upload your data for you, and in time of an emergency, the way it's currently structured, you can push a button and you can send it to Jeff. And Jeff's trying to deal with a massive outbreak in the state of Iowa, God forbid. You need to be able to visualize and make decisions in real time and put in the lab tests that show my farm is negative. And I haven't had pigs moving in and out of a control area or trucks moving in and out of a control area that I may have inadvertently be dragging the disease back to my farm. And I don't know, what's the incubation period for ASF? 2 weeks? Think about that. You could drag it back to your place, 2 weeks would go by before the symptoms show up. So it's critically important if the state vet's going to give you a certificate of movement after the initial 20 or 72-hour hold, they've got to feel confident we're not inadvertently or accidentally spreading disease around the nation. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about sustainability. And at the end of the day, we're producing one product. It's pork. We often think, well, we're pork producers, we're pig producers, we're on the farm, and we think our job kind of ends when we drop the hogs off at the packing plant. The reality is we only produce one product, and we have to make sure that the consumers out there understand that our product that we produce is done in an ethical manner with our We Care principles, and that we can actually prove what we're doing on the ground. And so the ability to show improved soil health and improving our impact on the environment is also part of our freedom to operate messaging. So, how many of you have heard the word sustainability? Everybody. How many have heard the word conservation? How many have heard the word efficiency? Productivity? You get my point. At the end of the day, folks, this is nothing new to pork producers. For thousands of years, we have figured out how you take the livestock manure, you put it on the ground, it grows the corn and the soybeans that produce the feed, that we feed the pigs, and out pops ham and bacon. That's now the buzzword is called regenerative agriculture, circular economy, sustainability is the new word for stewardship or conservation, or frankly, productivity and efficiency and economics. Every single day on our farm, we're trying to figure out how you save a buck, how you do more with less, and we don't think anything of it. But the consumer out there isn't talking our language. They want to hear it in terms of, well, sustainability or regenerative agriculture, or, oh, you're putting organic manure back on the ground and growing your crops. Well, that's pretty cool. So our job at the Pork Checkoff is to make sure we're telling that story, but we're building the data sets necessary to tell that story so they don't think that we're just greenwashing, that we're just making stuff up and pulling numbers out of the air. And that's what Sara at Sustainable Environmental Consultants will talk about as well. And let's face it, folks, look, we don't need to be afraid of any of this. There's a lot of talk now in the supply chain, whether it's the grocery stores or, you know, say end users like McDonald's. We were with some folks from McDonald's last night. They know the consumers are asking for this. And in our surveys of consumers, millennials, and the Gen Z, my daughter's 22, just graduated from Iowa State. It is interesting talking to her and then talking to her brother, who's 28 and on her farm operation. There is a worldview there that is not bad. It's just that they're going to vote with their food dollar. And they are going to spend money on things that they feel guiltless about consuming. And to do that, we need to have the data necessary to tell the story. So what I'm saying, folks, is don't be afraid of this. We're here. We've got your back. We've got a carbon market kind of 101 Pork Academy session coming up that'll tell you all about what you need to know in that space. But at the end of the day, if you're not telling your story, someone else is going to tell it for you, and they're going to tell it wrong. And our job is to make sure you've got the data to tell it right. And all that, folks, is based on We Care. Now, I'm going to ask for a show of hands. How many have heard of We Care? Everybody's hand should go up in this room. Because that are the ethical principles that you as pork producers developed over 14 years ago. You developed these, and you can see them. Food safety is incredibly important. Jeff and I were just talking about that before we joined the session. Animal well-being. People may refer to that as animal care as well. We've got a responsibility to take care of our animals properly. Public health. That intersection, and people ask, you know, is it safe to live by a hog barn? Am I going to get sick working in a hog barn? These are questions that people have, and we need to be able to answer them. Our communities. I know many of you come from small towns like I do. My hometown is 500 people. Everybody had to do something in town. You had to be on the fire department. You had to be on the church board. You had to be on the elevator board. That's the people that we live and work with every day. And we do a lot of stuff that we don't take any credit for, but that's just part of being a good citizen. And that's what we are as pork producers. Our people. During COVID, there were a lot of questions suddenly about essential workers. Suddenly you realize that there are a heck of a lot of people out there in that supply chain that get up every morning and they're doing chores and they're hauling feed and they're running the processing plants and they're driving the trucks to the grocery stores and they're stocking the shelves and they're getting food to people. We need to make sure that we are walking the talk and living our ethical principles and treating people right and making sure they're safe and have a rewarding career in the pork industry. That's who we are as producers. And then the green circle there is environment. At the end of the day, people want to make sure that by raising corn and soybeans and spreading hog manure, nutrients, that we're not somehow damaging the environment in the long run. And we've got really good news and really good stories to tell on all of these things. So our sustainability platform, folks, is based on something you should know very well, and frankly, you shouldn't be afraid of any of it because it's things that you do every single day. Now, on-farm sustainability reports. This is the key to you actually taking a step into this arena and getting a snapshot of your farm that belongs to you. We currently have over 200 production systems involved. 230,000 acres have gone through the pilots here this last year, about 2.3 million pigs. You're going to get a sustainability report from an independent third-party group, Sustainable Environmental Consultants, that's here today, and this is paid for by your pork checkoff. This is information and power and knowledge for you. This is designed to make you better informed about your operations, so when you're having conversations with your friends and neighbors or the county commissioners, you actually will have third-party, independent, verified data that you can show people. And folks, at the end of the day, people are asking legitimate questions around how their food is raised. And we at the Checkoff are here to make sure that you have legitimate answers to those questions. Now, we're going to get into labor, and we're going to get into economics with Victor and Steve. And so we're going to move into that. And I'm going to turn the podium over to, well, Dr. Meyer. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. I need that clicker. Thanks, Bill. It's good to be with you this morning. Good morning, Sophie. How are you? I'm to blame or responsible for that young lady getting involved in the hog business on a 4-H project many years ago. It is great to be with you this morning. With all due respect to the other panelists, all these things are all great, but in the long run, they don't matter if you aren't profitable. So in the long run, you got to make a buck in this business. We're going to talk about some of that here today. Key issues for hog and pork markets. Obviously, at the top of the list right now is production costs, and that's not going to get better anytime soon. We have caught up on planting this year's crop pretty much. If you live in North Dakota, you're still behind, but other than that, everybody else is pretty well caught up. Now, that's the good news. The bad news is we are behind. Now, the good news is, seeing a little, that planting timing is not very indicative of the size of the crop. It's not nearly as important as the rain the third week of July and the second week of August, okay? And so we could still raise a very good crop this year, but we have to. And even if we do raise a good crop, your costs are going to stay high. This is a model that I have based on the Iowa State University's estimated cost and return series. It used corn and soybean meal prices out from the futures market to predict what costs of production are going to be. This represents probably the low-cost 25% of producers out there. All right, the average producer is going to be $7, $8 higher than this. So that means $1 a pound for this year's break-even cost. And next year is going to be very close to that. Why is this? Well, the shocking thing is it's not because of short crops really anywhere. We haven't had a real short crop anywhere in the world. Now, this year, the Ukraine's going to be a little challenged, and they're important. They provide a lot of the export product in the corn and wheat markets. And so that's an issue this year. But we haven't really had short crops. What we've had is a shift in demand that's been basically caused by public policy decisions and renewable diesel that has driven the value of anything with fat in it, including soybean oil, higher. That drags soybean prices higher, and that drags corn prices higher. And so we're in this situation for the foreseeable future. We don't see a real break from these costs at least until 2024. And so we think we're going to stay high. Now, will we stay at $1 a pound? Probably not. But we're not going back in the 60s, and we're probably not going to go back in the 70s, maybe ever. All right, so we got to keep that in mind. Cost of production are going to be a problem for the foreseeable future. Prop 12 certainly is an issue that is out there. It's a market-driving issue. The status on that right now, of course, is that the lawsuit, the appeal of the Ninth Circuit Circuit of Court of Appeals decision by the National Pork Producers Council and American Farm Bureau are pending at the Supreme Court. They will hear that case sometime this fall. We should get a decision next winter. And away from the courts, though, California has written the rules. We understand they are at the Department of Administration in California for review. If they publish a final rule, there's a district court ruling in California that says they can't enforce that rule for 6 months after they publish it. Now, they were supposed to publish final rules in the fall of 2019. All right, so they're a tad bit behind. They're further behind there than I am in painting the house, okay? So 6 months out, it's not going to start until December. I mean, we can do some rapid mathematics on that one. And but that's where we stand right now. Should they publish that rule, they could move forward and do this. I don't know what the legal wrangling will be, Bill. I presume that somebody's going to ask the Supreme Court to issue a stay and say that's going to cause permanent damage. I don't know if that'll happen, but that's where we stand. This thing, we'll need about 600,000 sows converted to provide all the product that California has historically consumed. We think we're in the 300,000 range, maybe not quite that much so far. That would be Prop 12 compliant. So it's going to be a big deal. ASF, obviously, we're going to talk about the science of it. The economics of it is we don't want the stuff, all right? That's the simple thing. And it's obviously an issue. This is a tough disease. There's some real news and some real developments going on the vaccine standpoint, right? But as Jeff will attest, and Dustin, a vaccine is a treatment, not a preventive, right? You're not going to use a vaccine to prevent ASF coming here because it gives you a positive titer, and so we know where that goes. But that's going to be an issue, still is an issue, still having an impact in some places. Domestic consumer level demand has been excellent. I show you this. This is total per capita consumption / availability / disappearance. They're all the same, okay? We actually figure it up as kind of availability, and we know that it disappeared somewhere, and we presume that somebody consumed it, when in fact somebody's dog could have consumed part of this. But the important thing of this is it's staying near 220 pounds. We were at 220 pounds back before the ethanol program came along and drove up costs, and we reduced supplies for a while, and look where we are now. We're back to 220 pounds, and we're staying there. And I always put this up and say, in spite of all the things that we've had our hair on fire about over the last 10 years, all those animal welfare videos, all the activist groups, all the PETA things, all of the HSUS stuff against us, all of that thing, 220 pounds of meat being consumed by American consumers. Now, you see a little drop next year. That's all because of the beef business. And why is the beef industry falling? Because it ain't raining in the west half of the United States. That's why. All right? What the beef industry wants to do and what they're allowed to do by climatic conditions are two different things frequently, and that's exactly where we are now. They've got great prices. They'd like to be raising more beef cattle, but they don't have the resources to do it since they're so land-based. But in spite of all these negative things we've seen, people are still eating 220 pounds of meat. Now, that's a real testament to the strength of meat. Bill pointed out the other day, at Bloomberg article last week, there was a whole article of the animal rights people and animal welfare people ruining the fact that after all they've tried, people are still eating 220 pounds of meat. And I thought, that couldn't happen to a nicer bunch of guys. So, okay, this is pork. You can see we're kind of in that range of 50 to 52 pounds. Now, we had a big divergence out of that range during the early 2000s, and that was caused, again, by very high costs of production. It's caused by a short corn crop in 2012, and so we reduced the amount of pork that we produced for a few years, but we're back in this range. If this chart went back to 1980, virtually all of the observations would be between 50 and 52 pounds per person, okay? That's what people eat. Now, is that good? Well, I'd like it to be 60, but it's a darn sight better than 40. Okay, so in a world with all those challenges, maintaining the level of consumption out there is important. Now, some people would say, well, that means that demand is stable. No, it doesn't. Consumption is not demand. Demand involves price as well, and so you have to look at price. And this is what real retail prices, and we derive these from an AMS weekly report of retail features around the country. And if you use the ERS retail price data mill, it would look a lot the same. You wouldn't have as much detail here as far as time, but you can see retail pork prices have been extremely high. Now, some people would say, well, we shouldn't be charging that much. Poppycock. I mean, any business wants to raise the price of the product they sell. And this means that consumers are willing to pay that much. And we've done this without reducing, again, I'll go back, without reducing the amount of product that we're asking them to buy. They're paying more for the same quantity of product. That's called strong demand, okay? And you have to look at both quantity and price to judge what demand does. I use a thing called real per capita expenditures. It's basically just the product of those two. And when we look at that, we can see pork demand has been very good this year, up 5.7% year over year through March. We'll get the data this afternoon for April. I think that'll be a continuation of this strong demand. Beef demand is up as well. Chicken demand is up as well. It's been a really good run for meat demand in general over the last 2 years. Record high. Why? I don't have a real good explanation. I know we changed a lot of buying habits in 2020 when we shut down all the restaurants. And people started buying a lot more product at retail, and it seems like they've continued to do that. If you look at expenditures between retail grocery stores and food and service and drinking places, the restaurants have recovered back to their pre-pandemic trend. The retail grocery stores sales are still well above that pre-pandemic trend. It's not a zero-sum game, and I think we've had a significant change in the way consumers behave. Of course, hog supply is a big deal. Operational packing capacity, the key word there is operational. Of course, during the pandemic, that operational thing took us 40% of our capacity out at one time. We've had real labor challenges on that over the last 2 or 3 years. That's getting better. So that's an important, and finally, we're going to have to deal with some price discovery issues at some point. This is the March Hogs and Pigs report. It was deemed bullish at the time it came out, with the actual year-over-year changes being all lower than what was expected by the trade going into the report. We're basically, we're below, the futures market is below where it was in March. For the summer months, we're basically about the same for December and October. It's been kind of a sideways kind of move here. There was several important numbers in here. One was, of course, the market herd was down significantly more than what was expected right here, except for marketing down 1.4% more than what we thought. The breeding herd did not grow, and I thought we would be moving back into a growth phase on the breeding herd because of profits last year. It was a great year. We had $20-some head on our model, and that usually gets you expansion. Well, it hasn't. We'll talk about that in a minute. And finally, the one that was a real kind of a surprise to me was this one right here, pigs per litter. We've been kind of in a self-imposed hiatus on productivity growth for 2 years. And part of that was, at one time we didn't have room for pigs, and so we killed a bunch of them. Okay, we had to. We didn't have a choice. And so that limited pigs saved per litter. In December, we've moved back to 1.3% year-over-year growth. And I thought we were off to the races on productivity again. And yet, in the March report, it said, not so fast, Sparky. We're just going to go up 1/10 of 1%. We have tremendous genetic potential out there in the breeding herd to start grow litter size. But we're not doing it right now. And of course, PRRS has been a problem on that. The re-emergence of PEDV in some places this winter has been a problem there. But this is one place right here where we can start increasing pig supplies very quickly without growing the breeding herd, because we have a marvelously potential out there of these animals to produce pigs. What does it mean for slaughter? Well, this is a little busy, but the red smooth line is my forecast for slaughter based on that report. And notice the actual numbers have been running above that for virtually every week since then. In fact, by the time we get through what we expect to see next week, we're going to be 900,000 head or so above what I thought we were going to be slaughtering since March 1st, and about 400,000 head or 450,000 head above what the straight USDA report would have suggested. So what does that mean? Well, it means, one, early on, I think we had some pigs that had been held during the first quarter of the year. We had an uptrending market. Even though costs were high, you made more money by feeding the pigs a little longer and put more weight on them. We had space available. We had a number of empty spaces out there because the inventory was down. And so I think we were holding some pigs. So this first part was kind of getting those pigs to market. But as this has gone on and we kept running above what was expected out of this, I think we have to conclude right now that USDA undercounted the pigs a bit on March 1, and they'll probably revise that when the report comes out in June. If we look at weights, this kind of tells that story. We ran weights, producer sold weights well above a year ago through the first quarter. We finally kind of reconciled that during the month of May. As the cash market softened a bit, all of a sudden you didn't make money by holding a pig another week. And then if we look over here on the right, though, this is all the packer-raised pigs, and this accounts for about 40% of the total. And look how heavy they are. I mean, they're huge. That is mainly due to Smithfield on the East Coast. They've had some operational problems at plants that have backed some hogs up. Plus, they closed a plant out there last year, and if you want to sell a given amount of pounds and you can't slaughter as many head, what is one way of making up the difference? Well, you add pounds per head, and I think that's there, and it's probably going to be kind of a permanent thing that we're going to see these packer-raised pigs be heavier. But that adds about 1% to our production, just the difference in weight on those packer-raised pigs. Our slaughter forecast for the year, we got it down 3%. Now, this is a pretty big change for the second half of the year due to the March Hogs and Pigs report. When I did my forecast out of the December Hogs and Pigs report, I assumed, and it was pretty much an assumption, but I think it was based on good logic, that we would start growing the breeding herd again. Well, as I pointed out a while ago, the March report said we didn't do that. So that means the second half of this year is going to be lower than it was a year ago, in fact, because the breeding herd was down. And so we've got negative numbers on those 2 quarters. This is USDA's forecast. This is billion pounds, not head. And they've got that down 2.2% for the year, and that's about right. Down a little more on slaughter than you are on production because weights are heavier. And you can see a couple of other sources, Iowa State University, Dr. Lee Schultz, and the Livestock Marketing Information Center, and I provide those mainly as context for our forecast going forward. We were down about 5.4% in the first quarter. We were pretty close to that. I had it down 5.1, so that wasn't too bad. So a clear message from the report is we've fallen and we can't or don't want to get up. I mean, that's kind of where we are. And there's some really good reasons. Number one, labor is still an issue. You know, it's a lot better in our packing plants, but it's still an issue on farms. I mean, one of the reasons I think we're having trouble with pigs per litter is we don't have enough workers in on a lot of farms. There are farms that have had real problems keeping workers. Building costs have skyrocketed. This is some estimates from a major builder that provided it to us of what it cost in 2019 to build breeding and gestation, farrowing, GDU barns with no site costs in either one of these. $3,000 a sow now, up from just under $2,000. Wean to finish, double wide, wean to finish, state-of-the-art buildings. Again, no site costs. $250 a space in 2019, almost $400 now. Plus, what about interest rates in 2019 and right now? So the debt servicing on this has gone up. If you go build a building right now, you're locking in very high fixed costs for a long time. So it's one of the real issues that we have. Materials, equipment delays, another one, builder availability. Many have been doing Prop 12 conversions, and so it's hard to get them. Production costs, we talked about that a while ago. Not just feed, though. Everything else has gone up as well. Gilt availability has been really tough this winter because of PRRS at multipliers. And finally, where do the pigs go for processing? We are still tight on slaughter capacity in the fourth quarter this year. It's not going to be as tight as it has sometimes in the past. We're not building the sow herd. This sow slaughter as a percentage of the breeding herd has to get down here below 0.9% in order to build the sow herd. You can see historically, when we got here, we started adding to the sow herd. We're not that low, and so we've really got to start retaining a lot more sows to do there. What does it mean for profitability? If we put the futures market or past prices on here, you can see this year, last year, $21.50. That's the second best year on record. This year, this number was as high as $23 back in March, April, when the futures market was so high for lean hogs. Well, it's come down to about $10 for this best low-cost 25% of producers. That means about break even for the average for this year. And you can see continued high costs next year, some moderation. So the cutout value we think is going to stay somewhere in this $1 to $1.10 range for a long time here. Well, I don't see a lot of rally of that. Demand last year was excellent. You can see this quantity at a much higher price on the cutout value. This is where we were back in December. It had waned some during the fourth quarter. Here's where we are now. Okay, so we're right back up on this very high demand relationship, a very positive thing. And so we've got hog prices in the low dollars, maybe up to $1.10 or $1.12 on a quarterly basis here. And the futures market has kind of come back to us, to my forecast here over the last 3 weeks. The sell-off in lean hogs has really, I think, brought us back to reality. And so I think it's pretty fairly priced going forward. National net hog prices somewhere in the $1.05 to $1.08 range this summer. Again, but not falling dramatically into the fall, just below $90, which is good.
My name is Victor Ochoa. I work for SwineWorks. And I'm going to talk about this issue, labor issue, that we've been familiar in the swine industry for the last 15 years ago, at least. I came in the U.S. To work for Smithfield over 15 years ago, and we already have that issue. So that is not big news. What is big news is that this issue is across the entire country. Okay, we never seen this labor shortage, at least since I was looking the other day, World War II. okay, almost 80 years. So it's not in our generation. We've never seen something like this. And what it's creating is we've seen this spike on wages, a lot of competition for employees, staff. We've seen Walmart, Amazon, they start paying $22 an hour for entry-level positions. So the bad news is how are we going to compete with these industries? So we are in a pretty bad spot in the swine industry. So I'm trying to figure out why are we on this spot right now. So if we take a look on this chart, it's basically the jobs, the vacancies, and the labor force in the black one, the red one is the vacancy. So we have a shortage almost of 5 million workers in the US right now. And obviously, everybody's blaming COVID, right? COVID is the big issue here. Well, we cannot use it as an excuse. The only thing that COVID did was just triggering an issue that we've seen that trend coming from a couple of years earlier, 2018, 2017. We start seeing that little gap, and this is not a political talk or anything like that, but if we remember with Trump, he started tightening up immigration system, and that was one of the issues that we start seeing this little gap. But if we continue the trend, we see that we are already there. I mean, it's just, we are where we're supposed to be if we eliminate COVID. And the same thing with the workforce, you know. So it's kind of finding a plateau there, and it's technically trending a little bit down. So how are we going to find these 5 million employees to fill all our vacancies? So obviously, everybody's blaming the government, right? We are paying them for staying home, and we need to incentivize them. If we take a look deeper into this issue, we are already back to the levels of unemployment even before COVID. So this is from last year. We're on 3.5 million people on unemployment. Right now, we are below 1.5. Before COVID, we're pretty close to 1.7 million people on unemployment. So it's not really an issue of people not wanting going back to work. What is happening is a lot of people call it the great retirement. We have 25% of the workforce was, or it is baby boomers.
I'm going to jump in there one of these days. Not yet.
And COVID didn't help that much. You know, we have that housing market crash in 2008, so they were holding a whole bit more to try to get the money back. And then we have the housing market right now exploding, right? So they don't want to go to those Zoom meetings and start using that technology anymore. It's time to pack and time to go. They don't want to get involved in these issues anymore. So we have a huge spike on retirement from baby boomers. And this is important because if we don't have the baby boomers, for me, that's like the golden workers. They really want to work hard. They are workaholics. They are very loyal to the company. They are not switching jobs every year compared to millennials and younger generations, right? So we have to start thinking how are we going to attract this younger generation, who are going to keep them, because it's a completely different generation compared to the baby boomers. So that is a big issue that we have right now. Now, the third reason why we're having that many issues is immigration, like I mentioned before. So obviously, COVID didn't help at all. When COVID break, we had the lockdown, so a lot of immigrants decide to stay in their countries, go back to their country, like students and other type of visas. But like I mentioned before, with the immigration policy that we have on the previous administration, a lot of the green cards were stopped. A lot of H-1Bs visas were stopped issuing them. So that generates a lot of issues on the workforce. Why? There was a big number for me. So 30% of the population growth in the US come from immigrants. So 3 out of 10. However, 6 out of 10 participate in the workforce. So it's double that amount participating in the workforce. So if we eliminate the immigrant workers, that's why we have this huge gap. Okay. The good news is immigration is kind of going back to normal. We have the same entrance that we have before COVID. However, not at the rate that we need to make that gap or cover that gap before. So especially because, like say, we don't have US workers joining the labor force. So what options do we have? We have a lot of the visas, and that's something that still surprised me, pork producers. We specialize in the TN visa, and we can talk a little bit further about this program. But the issue here is a lot of these visas, they have a cap, and that cap is set by Congress. It cannot be changed by the president, it needs to be changed by Congress. So my point here is not going to be very easy to change because of political reasons. So we're going to be stuck here on those numbers for a while, unless something dramatically happens in Congress or in the president. So we have several options, and I like to educate a lot of the producers about the options that we have. But so, for example, we can bring people from Australia, people from Chile, Singapore. We have those intercompany exchange. Obviously, we are very familiar with the H-2A program for agricultural workers, but we have the H-1Bs, H-2Bs, J visas, and TNs. So we just need to pay attention for the most part for the one that says that they have no cap, because those are the ones that we can use in a larger volume than the other ones. In the right side, we can see the trend and the volume that those visas has been used. This is during COVID. Obviously, we have a huge gap or decrease in how many entries we have. Not that many on the H-2A. H-2A visas kind of stay the same, but the rest of the visas drop dramatically. Now, we're pretty close to the same level we should have been without COVID. So that's the good news. However, like I mentioned before, it's not enough workers to fill those vacancies. So are we going to change? This is a survey on how important is immigration or illegal immigration for parties. So we can see Democrats are not really interested. It's not a big issue for them. It's a big issue for Republicans. So what I'm trying to highlight here is, because it's a very polarizing topic, it's going to be very difficult for any given party to make a change on immigration, especially with elections in November. So it's going to be a big issue in the industry in the coming years. So what can we do about it? First of all, we need to take care of our current staff. Okay, a lot of my clients, I see that mistake. They start offering more and more ways to try to attract new people. I have some clients that start already offering $20 an hour for the new employees. And then you look around, and they have an employee with 5 years experience on the farm still making $16, $14 an hour. So we need to really take care of our current staff, because whether they are good or bad, it's going to be very difficult to replace them. Okay, so that will be my first advice. The second, we need to update our benefit package and our wages. For me, it's still kind of surprising. We still have some clients that are offering $12 an hour, which is around the average. The average right now is $14 for our clients. But like I say, we have from 20 all the way to 12. So it's going to be very difficult to compete with other companies. Before, we only compete against our agriculture type of industry. Right now, we're competing against everybody. So it's going to be very, very difficult if we don't increase our wages on our workers, which I understand is sometimes hard, but we have to do something. About benefits, talking about this new generation, we need to understand what is important for them. These are not hard workers, loyal, I'm going to grow in the company. We need to understand what they really want from a company, and that is have a sense of belonging or belonging to that company, have a purpose for that company. So, and having a lot of work-life balance on their careers. So if we look on the benefit, on the standard benefit, they normally offer 1 week per year, and that's it. And then after 5 years, you qualify for 2 weeks of vacation. Now companies like McDonald's, Walmart, they start offering 3 months of vacation. Okay, they start offering paying tuition for school. 3 months. 3 months. So it's not on every place.
I'm going to talk to my boss on that one.
And
3 months.
And you don't have to pay those vacations. I mean, they don't have to be paid, but that's a good benefit that you can offer. It's just a matter of getting creative. You can stagger more employees. But you have to be creative. That's my point on those benefit packages, because it's a completely different type of demographic for your workers. Third party, if they cannot see you, they won't be able to find you. Still surprised me how less than 10% of my clients don't have any website. They don't have any presence on social media, on Instagram. And in reality, there's no excuse, because they are free. I mean, I can make a Facebook page, an Instagram page in 20 minutes. You give me the picture, in 20 minutes I do a Facebook page or an Instagram page, and it's free. Okay? Obviously, website costs a little bit more if you want a nice design and all of that. But there is no excuse to have no presence on social media. And that is going to create that sense of belonging in a community, in your farms, your facilities, and it's going to be more attractive for this new generation. And then the other part, obviously, is explore other visa programs. Like I mentioned, there's almost 10 visas that you might be using one of those, but there is more than H-2A program, which is kind of restrictive for swine industry. We really like the TM visa, but right now, for example, we are start exploring Ukrainian refugees, for example. And there is a program we can bring refugees for up to 2 years from Ukraine. We haven't done it yet, but we start looking into that already. So we'll keep you posted how that goes. But there is different programs. Like I said before, it's going to be very challenging to change any of the immigration reforms. Obama tried it, Trump tried it, and then Biden, and I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. But there is options there that we can help you.
Talk to you a little bit about sustainability, because Bill did a great job of introducing the fact that it can be kind of a scary word or a buzzword or a word that you hear from people maybe in mainstream media or people that aren't engaged with farming. And you think, well, what do they know about sustainability? Or it's something that might be feeling like it's pushed down your throat. Well, I want to talk to you about that. So even in this photo, we see a nice crop, we see our farmer, we see the irrigation line. And it's like Bill said, sustainability is what we've been doing forever as farmers, right? So my family farm in Illinois, that's what they've been doing for a long time. My cousin continues on and to make sure that the farm is sustainable. To your point, Steve, we have to have business sustainability too. It's not decoupling efficiency, business sustainability from taking care of the earth, taking care of our pigs, people, pigs, and planet, right? So it's important to recognize that before we start in sustainability. And I would say actually, so with the United Nations, their definition for sustainability roughly is providing for today's needs without sacrificing the needs of future generations. Yep, that pretty much sounds like what farmers have done for millennia, to your point, Bill. So let's continue in that. We have a fantastic story to tell in farming. And again, we've been doing that, whether we call it conservation, whether we call it stewardship, whatever we do call it, now we can call it sustainability to help people understand what we're doing better. We can now get that data, and so that we can show what we're doing. There are only a few industries that are on our planet that can sequester carbon, that can really improve the planet. Agriculture, forestry, those are your two main ones. Think about United Airlines. They're just using resources, right? Are they putting stuff back in? Well, not unless they're planting trees or taking care of the earth some other way like that. Amazon, you mentioned. Amazon, Walmart, mainly they're using resources, right? Now, again, if they then fund us to plant trees or fund us to do things, sure, then they're helping to regenerate some things, but mainly they're using resources. So I think we need to, as agriculture, shift our paradigm of thinking, and forestry, in case you're involved in that, shift our paradigm of thinking, okay, this is what people are actually asking for. This is what they want, and we can show it to them, we can prove it to them. And so, as was said in my introduction, I was with National Pork Board for 6.5 years before stepping over to the company Sustainable Environmental Consultants. I'll talk to you a little bit about that. So I was actually a client of the company I'm working for now for about 4 years before stepping over. And I've seen the power that the information that the company provides, and I know a number of you have actually participated with us in those on-farm sustainability reports. So Sustainable Environmental Consultants, or SEC, as you see at the top left, we're verified by Eco-Practices. Eco-Practices is the platform, think of our computer system, where all of our data goes in. We're going to verify that. We're going to run that through models and the mathematical equations to help determine what's going on your farm. And so there's more you can see here. So we have we're an independent third party. So we provide that scientific, evidence-based sustainability metrics for regenerative agriculture, which again, some of you might say, oh, Sara, that's regenerative agriculture, that's a buzzword too. That's true, but it is something that the public does resonate with, but basically measure for what you're doing on your farm. So things like reduced tillage, improving soil health practices, increasing carbon sequestration, but also within your farm, within the pig barn, reduced energy usage, whether that's electricity, propane, looking at items like that. Feed conservation, making sure that feed's not going down the pit, making sure we're adjusting feeders correctly so that you're using less feed, which reduces your carbon footprint. Also, it can help your manure, right? So thinking of things in this new way, and I know my friends and coworkers that are at the National Pork Board and on the board have heard me say this many times. I think of it, and I call it the comma and. So when you think about, let's take that feed example. When you reduce your feed wastage, that's good for your profitability, right? Especially with our input cost right now. Comma, and it reduces your greenhouse gas footprint. It reduces your carbon footprint. So we need to start thinking, coupling these things. Okay, if I get new water nipples, that reduces my water usage. Also, that's improving your environmental footprint. And if you're paying for water, it's reducing your cost. All right, if I change from LED light bulbs, that's going to reduce my cost. Fantastic. But it's also going to reduce your carbon footprint. So think about it, comma, and it's also going to do this for you. We've thought about things in this way: business sustainability, continuity, being able to pass it on to the next generations. Now we just need to help finish that sentence for people that aren't as familiar with agriculture and why we do what we do. So Sustainable Environmental Consultants, we've been a consulting firm for over 12 years and have been working with farmers. We work a lot with National Pork Board and you as pork producers, but we also work across all sectors of agriculture and some in forestry as well. As we think about sustainability, and you think, well, Sarah, does this have staying power? Is this just the next buzzword? Is it a flash in the pan? You heard Steve mention earlier that all that work, we heard all this stuff about animal welfare over time, and that didn't affect our per capita consumption, right? So we think, okay, that was a buzzword, right? Animal well-being, animal welfare. Whoop, now here we are. Oh, is sustainability going to be the same? It's not, folks. From everything and all the folks that I talk to, whether they're in the field of sustainability or not, this is something that's going to have staying power. And again, what I'm here to do is figure out how to help you profit from what you're already doing. Help tell your story, help share your story so that we can improve. So as we look at some recent headlines, I want you to understand that, again, this isn't just National Pork Board telling you this, hey, this is something that's happening, or me telling you, hey, this is something that's happening. Let's look at this top left. Walmart digs into regenerative agriculture. That's from GreenBiz, which obviously is really around the sustainability space. Walmart's big in this space, folks, and that's somebody that we talk to. But they created their own sustainability metrics a few years back with the Sustainability Consortium. Now, when you look at those metrics, those are not, and I could read them to you, but they're not really favorable to the swine industry as far as being able to easily answer them. So the first question asks about deforestation in South America for your soybean crop, or the soybeans that you feed your pigs. Well, we're not bringing in a lot of soybeans to feed our pigs, so how do we answer that question? And so what National Pork Board has done with creating goals and metrics for you as pork producers is to be able to answer those questions. And then the product that we have for you helps to show that proof, that data. If we look here, most consumers want and will pay more for sustainable options, but struggle to easily find them. So that's, again, as we look at the economist side, yeah, if they're willing to pay for it, great. Now, of course, put their money where their mouth is and actually pay for it is important. But how do we help them easily navigate that and find that? So how do we help connect you through the supply chain in that way? And finally, consumers still care about sustainability amid pandemic report finds. So when we were going through COVID heavily, our consumers were still thinking about these things. Now, obviously, we saw changes in their concerns. Bill and Victor both mentioned, and Steve, everybody mentioned labor and the issues around the pandemic and what happened, and the concerns people had for labor, the concerns people had for everything related to sustainability. And I think that's an important point, is that sustainability isn't just environment. That's oftentimes what we think first, but Bill showed you those 6 tiles for the We Care ethical principles. Sustainability is truly all-encompassing. So when we talk about labor, that's absolutely part of sustainability. Because how are we going to run our farms? How are we going to run our packing plants, our whole food supply chain, if we don't have the labor? It is about all of these parts and pieces. And so during COVID, the consuming public, their senses became heightened to all of that. And again, that seems to be staying, and that they're very interested in that. So with that in mind, how do we, as agriculture, help show them and say, yep, we're doing that. Here's the data to show you. And we know, again, as we think about this, consumer pressures and industry transparency, they are here to stay. You've heard it from other speakers. People want that transparency. They want to know where their food is coming from more so now than ever. Now, this is a Sara opinion. I think part of that is because now we're all connected to farming and the supply chain here. But think about people that you know that aren't and are generations removed. They would just know this information before. They didn't have to ask and try to find out, what is a pig fed? Because they would know it. But if I talk to my friends that live in Chicago, they have no idea what pigs are fed. So I have to tell them. So for us, you think, why do we have to tell people to eat corn and soybeans and a vitamin premix? Because they've never heard of that before, folks. So I know some of it seems very elementary for us on this, but it's a way that we can help the public understand, and then that helps gain trust in the pork that they're eating. So that's what we want to do. And so you see some items, 59% of people under the age of 30 often or always consider how responsible a brand is when choosing food and drinks. Now that's a brand. Now we could think of pork as a brand, but if you think, are they going to buy Coca-Cola? Well, do they trust them or not? Are they going to buy Tyson products or Fairlife milk? Or are they going to buy Nikes? How do they treat their workers? Where do they make the products? People are considering this more. And then 78% of consumers would like to change their lifestyle to be more environmentally friendly by reducing their impact on the environment and the climate. And so how do we make that easy for them? How do we help give them the easy button to understand that? Now, I know National Pork Board, because I was helping with the program before, is working on a national dashboard, national information that will help aggregate this to help easily tell the story, which is fantastic. But we have to get data into the system so that the National Pork Board can share that and do that on your behalf, as Bill mentioned earlier. But it's really exciting. We're doing this work with you as producers. Now, everything, you've got to think, this shows 2021 project overview. But a lot of it's on crop year, right? Because we're looking at your crops, we're also looking at your pigs. But that means, you say, why no 2022 data yet? Well, because as we've said, that's just going in the ground. So we're finishing up 2021. And you can see across the United States, this is preliminary. This isn't final data. And sorry, these got, in translating over to the new PowerPoint, looks like they got a little messed up. But this was on about 630,000 swine inventory, so that's sows and then market animals. Over almost 55,000 acres, 1,027 fields, and 45 farms. So this is a pretty sizable sample across the United States, and actually, the team just ran some more data, and that number's actually much higher now, about 80,000 acres, and we've got that at our booth that you can stop by and see the new number, and I've actually got it here. As we can see, as we look at using swine manure as fertilizer, again, think about, okay, great, we've got this great resource under our barns. Just in that sample that I showed you, that provided about $3.1 million in savings for pork producers because they were using swine manure instead of synthetic fertilizer. Now think of your input costs right now on synthetic fertilizers. Gosh, that keeps going up. That's going to be a bigger savings for you. And as we look at erosion rates, the project farms that were in that had soil erosion rates that were 76% lower. So I've got the data here. They're at about 1 ton per acre, the farms that are in this data set. The national average is 4.6 tons per acre. And so by doing the quantification that my team does and comes out to the farm, it proves that. Imagine how important that could be if you don't own your land, you're working with a landlord, or you rent to somebody else, and they go through this, and you can see what's actually happening on your fields. And then finally, as we look here, just over about 3,200 dump trucks of soil saved from being lost to erosion because of this improved rate. So it's very important that you get this data. This is real data, folks. These are not estimates. This is not what we think is happening. This is real data of what's happening on farm. And also, it's important to understand the data can show your carbon dioxide emissions. That little e is carbon dioxide equivalence. So that's on the science side, but basically how much carbon dioxide is coming from the operation. But we can reduce that, which is like taking over 5,500 cars off of the road. So think about, again, the power. And again, if you stop by, we can get you one of these sample reports in case you haven't gone through it yourself. And you can see we have these different metrics that you can look at to show you some of those examples. I think one that's really powerful to me on here is showing that of these farms in this sample data set, they are actually below neutral. If you think of how we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions and how much are they, and we want to be greenhouse gas neutral, carbon neutral. This data, these farms in the data set are already there. They're below neutral, folks. What if our industry is already better than carbon neutral? Think about the implications. Because we think about all these headlines and, farmers are killing the planet. What are we doing with this manure? And all those headlines. And think about the power that we could have with that data if we could say, no, actually, nope, not us. We're actually protecting the planet. We're actually improving the planet with what we're doing and sequestering carbon and reducing greenhouse gases. So as we think about it, it's really important that you say, well, Sarah, what do I do? How do we fight this? How do we combat it? Well, we have to get data into the system. We have to have data into the system. Another thing that we're working on with National Pork Board is getting some funding set up where companies further down the supply chain, food companies that are making the food and selling it to people, are willing to invest in our industry. So let's say, hey, National Pork Board, SEC, here's some funding. Go, if farmers have participated in this and they're looking to improve and they want to adopt some practices, this company is willing to support that adoption and help offset the cost or totally pay for the cost depending on that project. And so if you think, I'm really interested in trying cover crops, but it's expensive. It is. There is a cost. Well, let's see how we can help mitigate that for you. If you want to try a different tillage practice, well, yeah, that takes equipment, that takes some work. All right, these companies further down the supply chain are willing to invest, but you have to have data to be able to get access to that, or government funding. And some people like that, some people don't, but you've got to have the data into the system. So it was mentioned by Heather that we have the lounge hours, sustainability lounge hours, tomorrow 9 till noon. And I'll be there with my team, and we'll be there to answer any questions that you have about sustainability overall, about the report, about gathering data, and how we can help with that. Also, Bill mentioned there's a carbon markets presentation. That's very helpful. The data that, I will say right up front here, the data, we are not a carbon market. The data that we supply to you could be utilized to possibly go to a carbon market if you wanted to, but we are not a carbon market. But that's a power for us. We do not sell inputs. We're not a carbon market. We are just helping provide you the data, helping you better understand what's happening on your farm, and then giving some suggestions and helping consult on how you can improve that. But we also aren't going to try to sell you anything. We don't have any fertilizer, we don't have any seed, we don't have any solutions like that, but we can connect you with folks. So I hope that's been helpful to help you understand that sustainability, it is here, but as Bill said, don't be scared of it. It's not something to be scared of. It's something you all are doing, and you're doing very well. We'll just put it together so we can tell that story, and then National Pork Board can tell that story on your behalf. So thank you, Bill.
I guess the first thing I'd say is thank you all for sticking in here. If I were sitting in your shoes right now, I'd be saying, holy crap. We don't have enough workers. We've got $7 corn. We're short on people to adjust feeders and sustainability, and now a regulator's going to get up and talk to you. And I'm PowerPointless today. I'm going to maybe step you through a few things to think about a foreign animal disease. Sure. Well, which is a good thing too, because I've adjusted my talk several times as we're sitting here. Steve gave me one help. I fall and I can't get up. Thinking about ASF and how it's moved around the world, one thing to keep in mind, if you look at all of the foreign countries in the recent years that have gotten ASF, they've not gotten rid of it right away. I'm not sure I can think of any examples where they took that window to stamp it out and they've got it now for years. And even going back in time, when Spain got it years ago, it took them, roughly 30 years to get rid of it. So I'm going to step through in a minute what we've done with avian influenza and thinking about those key pieces, and if we have those opportunities, we have to take them. Bill mentioned this is your industry. I've used the example before, and I don't think I'm that old, but if you remember the original Caddyshack movie, when Chevy Chase is working with Danny Noonan and he says, see the ball, be the ball, control your destiny. That's something that I can't stress enough, the importance to be thinking about. And oftentimes when we think about foreign animal diseases, everybody quickly steps back and says, it's out of my control, I can't do anything. It is in your control. And make sure we're all being prepared. And some of the things we've learned in avian influenza, was our second time at it, and so people ask what are the lessons learned. I'd like to say lessons reconfirmed, and some of the approaches we've taken since 2015 and where we are now in preparedness. And it's happened through a lot of the states across the United States. If you look at this event, I think it's been a lot of good measures taken to control the disease and stop the spread. In fact, yesterday there was reported that when they look at the virus sequence, it looks like, and again, we go back in time with PRRS, and when we started looking at the virus sequence and PRRS, and we looked at the cut patterns and realized that was too broad of a look, but at least with the way they're looking at the avian influenza virus right now, it looks like 85% of the cases were point source introductions, either straight in from wild birds. So that's a testament to the poultry industry of biosecurity and keeping disease out, or not letting it. You can argue it got in somehow to start with, but at least we're stopping the spread laterally. We've had 19 cases in Iowa, 4 of those are backyard, 15 commercial. In 2015, we had 77. So I think 2 of the big keys, lessons reconfirmed, is stamping out the disease as quickly as possible, depopulating sites very quickly, and producers have, I think, giving attribute to producers, there's some biosecurity in place, and that was mentioned earlier. I mean, keeping disease out of the United States and making sure if we ever do get it, we're prepared for it. So I'm going to step you through, was very similar to a lot of the sites we had in Iowa, and I'm not going to tell you if it was the first site or second site or third site, because we didn't have that many, and you might figure out who they are because we always protect everybody. But the pieces we go through when somebody calls, and I apologize, I was looking at my phone a minute ago, somebody in the poultry industry is calling, so it's a little nerve-wracking yet that still could be somebody calling. But one of the first examples we had, the call came in on a Sunday morning, roughly 11 o'clock, and they had clinical signs of avian influenza. So, and they had described, and we made sure they had collected the right samples. So collecting samples is critically important. And we talk about certified sampler in the swine industry, verifying that. There's a lot of examples. We can go into further detail at other times, because I'm not going to try and even cover all of it here, but making sure we have the right samples, but getting them to the lab. But when that call came in, we mobilized our staff and we started working directly with that producer in their next steps. So we came in, we were all within the Wallace building within an hour and a half, 2 hours. And the next thing we started doing was working with the producer on indemnity. We have to start the paperwork for indemnity because USDA pays indemnity, but they pay it on the request of the state for the producer. So back to that triangle and everybody involved. So being involved now in indemnity and understanding that process is key. So we'd start the paperwork right away on indemnity. We would also start, Bill mentioned AgView. It is so important of all those movements on and off of farms, because we also start having discussions with the producer, what's moved on and off your farm. And again, keep in mind, we don't even have a positive result yet, or even a confirmatory. We're starting those discussions ahead of time and trying to figure out what's been on and off the farm. And when we talk about control areas, we were also going into EMERS, which is the database we use. We're starting to draw the circle, and we're preparing that if it does come back positive, we're going to prepare quarantines for all those facilities in that control area. So it's very critical that you're ready as a producer to start having those discussions. The other huge discussion we started having immediately was, how do you want to mass depopulate birds on your premise? And most all of the sites in Iowa, there was one of two ways that they were depopulated here in recent months. Either they were foamed, we foamed birds, and that was usually in turkey sites, or ventilation shutdown plus. And I hope everybody's grasping. I mean, those are big discussions. As a producer with an infected premise, you're going to be faced with a lot of very serious questions in a short amount of time. So from 11 o'clock, and we have the tremendous benefit, right, with avian influenza, our confirmatory lab is in Ames. If we have ASF, it has to go to Plum Island for confirmation, so that's going to add a few hours. But on that Sunday, by 4:30, we had confirmatory results. And we had everything in place, because with VSD Plus, we had to request to the USDA, we had to fill out special paperwork, a form, and we had to specifically request to do VSD Plus. But we had all that in place, so when the diagnosis came down, we were ready to present to the owner, and this as much with the USDA working in partnership, a co-incident command, that they would have the paperwork to look at and see what they were going to be paid for the birds. Now that's not, they have a right to appeal that, so I'm not saying you're forced into a corner that says you have to sign this so we can do it, but we want to move quickly. So there is an appeal process. So we were ready to do that. We were ready to issue the quarantine. We were ready to issue all the quarantine in the circle to let everybody else know. And we were ready to start the process for mass depopulation. And a lot of those sites depopulated their sites within 24 to 36 hours. We had several of our large sites in Iowa that took them 7 to 8 days, but when you start talking about a 5 million head facility with layers, it takes more time. It's not, but all of those sites we depopulated within 7 to 8 days. So I hope there's challenges we have yet in the swine industry of how are we going to do mass depopulation, making sure all those key pieces are in place. But we have a lot of those things in place. We've been working very hard in the last several years. Again, AgView, those records, getting producers ready. But what I want to stress is the importance is make sure you're prepared, have a plan. You may be one of the few farms, but we need to make sure if we have that window of opportunity. Well, I mentioned a lot of foreign countries right now have moved from that narrow window, if they had it, to stamp out and eradicate, to its endemic. So back to the markets and crashing and all of those things, we want to be prepared. So that's one of the things I can't stress enough. So I'm going to be pretty brief in what those are, but I'm happy to answer any questions. There's a lot of other examples behind what I just went through of the pieces to be prepared for, but it's I can't stress enough, again, it's your industry. We're here to help. We had the discussion, Steve and Dusty and I at the beginning, about some of the discussions you have with producers, and as a regulatory official, whether it was a good one or at the end of the discussion they weren't too happy with you, but I mean, it's better that we plan now and are all together on the same page than during the outbreak and we're looking at each other trying to figure out how we're going to approach it. So it's critical that we make sure we're planning now. So thank you. I guess one thing I'd say too, maybe we found a new time slot for FAD discussions and all the rest of them early in the morning, because usually they're in the afternoon, everybody's ready to head out. So I appreciate everybody sticking through this. Thank you.
Yeah, so the question is that Vietnam recently announced here within the past week that they had developed an ASF vaccine. I'm referred to Dr. Kaisand to field that question.
Sure, and I probably have as much of the similar information as you have. I mean, we're all hopeful that during an outbreak we'll have a good tool. It sounds like that's a step forward. Sounds like the DR is even considering using that vaccine right now. But was mentioned earlier, I mean, there would be a huge paradigm shift if we were to use vaccine ahead of an outbreak, because we can't prove a negative status. And that's the tremendous benefit we have right now, is we can prove a negative status because we can test animals. So hopefully hopefully we don't ever, but if we get it and there's vaccine available, it will help us contain the disease more quickly and stop the spread. So I apologize, I can't give you any specifics on that vaccine, but it sounds like one of the more promising discussions with a vaccine that we've had in recent years.
Or Dustin, I have a question on that. I know that U.S. veterinarians and USDA have been very involved in Vietnam the last 3 years, kind of trying to learn about ASF and control. Would we have been involved in this vaccine process as well?
I believe ARS is,
Yeah.
USDA and the ARS is.
Ag Research Service, yeah.
Yeah, you want me to comment a little bit? My name is Dusty Ochoa, and I'm the Chief Veterinary Officer for the National Pork Board. Good question. There's been some misleading headlines on this ASF vaccine in Vietnam. So, as you mentioned, USDA has worked for a long time with a lot of collaborators on the development of an ASF vaccine. And one of the vaccine platforms that they've developed at Plum Island Animal Disease Center, USDA has developed this, is what's called a gene-deleted vaccine. And it's showing some good promise. It's been shown to be efficacious and safe. It's recently completed a test called the reversion to virulence test. So it's been shown that it can be produced, it can be put into pigs, and then after several passages does not revert to a live virus. So it's a modified live virus that does not revert to an active ASF vaccine. So the benefit there is that produces a good immune response without having the danger of having it revert to an active virus. So what's happened there now is USDA has licensed that platform to a company in Vietnam. Vietnam has ASF in their pigs. They've had tremendous losses there. And so a company in Vietnam has taken that platform and is in the process of producing that. What's recently happened is Vietnam has allowed what they call some circulation permits to allow people to use that vaccine in Vietnam, and it will be used to see if that will help sites recover from ASF. As Steve mentioned, and Jeff too, the way that the vaccine would be intended to be used in the United States, similar to our FMD vaccine stockpile. We have stockpiles of vaccine available if needed, but you can't go buy it on the shelf, and nobody's vaccinating pigs or cattle for FMD vaccine. We probably would not use ASF vaccine in that way. We would have it in a stockpile with the intention to use it in a controlled manner if we were to get an outbreak.
I want to make a comment about foreign animal diseases and impacts on the domestic market. It is critical that you look at the difference in the export status of the businesses that you're talking about. It hits our layer industry, and what happens? The people that get hit lose a lot of birds, and the people that are left get to sell the eggs for $3 a dozen. Okay? Because they're not an exporter, generally. All right? The turkey business, a little different, but all of the avian species, they have trade impacts that are statewide at the least, and even quickly go to county levels frequently, okay? So it doesn't impact very much. Even though they can't export turkey out of Minnesota, we can export all kinds of turkey out of North Carolina. And so you drop the pebble in the bucket over here and the level of the bucket doesn't change, okay? It's really important. The pork industry, 180 degrees different. We get treated nationally. We export a huge amount of product. So, you know, it isn't the fact that, oh, well, we have ASF, they've got it in Iowa, we in Oklahoma are going to be fine. Wrong. Everybody's going to face 25 to 30% more product that has to clear the market, and they're going to face it for probably a year. And then you've got a challenge of how do we get production cut back so that we can balance this marketplace in the short run and still have a productive plant out there called a sow herd on the day that they decide that we can export again, okay? So it's really important to note the difference in export status of an affected animal or sector when it comes to foreign animal diseases and trade disruptions. And we're in about the worst shape of anybody because we export a high percentage, much more than beef does, okay? And we get treated nationally. And our diseases are always treated that way. Avian influenza is not. So I'd invite any comments to that, but that difference in status is really important.
Sure, and that's one of the concerns we have. I mean, we're going to have the foreign animal disease. We'll have farms infected, and we could be depopulating farms, but what do you do with the farms that don't have a home for their pigs?
Yeah.
Is that a COVID situation again? I mean, we have layers, a couple of the first layers that were infected have restocked, and not fully, but they've moved pullets back in or getting back into production. In fact, and we've just gone through the issue of people wanting to import eggs into the United States from foreign countries, because of the fact that we're short on eggs and the price of eggs goes up. So there's a lot of moving parts, but you're right, that's the biggest concern with the swine industry. And that's why it's so critically important too, that if we have that opportunity to contain disease in a smaller area, that's gonna be to our benefit to eradicate the disease. But with the way the swine industry moves and how interconnected we are, because it's gonna be difficult to start talking about regions, but it's key to pick up the disease early and do everything we can to stop it before it spreads.
Wasn't there some efforts at the USDA level to attempt some regionalization as it relates to ASF, and where does that stand? Thank you.
Yeah, the question about regionalization within the United States, and yeah, that's certainly something that's being looked into. What has been done right now is, with regard to ASF in the Dominican Republic and Haiti, recognizing that Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands are very close there. The OIE, the World Organization for Animal Health, looks at those U.S. territories as if they were states. So, you know, there was the risk of identifying ASF in a pig in one of those islands and having it have the same economic impact as if it were here in Iowa. And so USDA has created what they call a protection zone, which is a technical designation under the World Organization for Animal Health that they can say Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico are separate from the rest of the United States. And in fact, they've put in some trade restrictions. It was very strict at first. In fact, so strict they couldn't even get diagnostic samples from those locations into diagnostic labs in the United States. They've made that change, but we're currently not receiving any pork products except for diagnostic samples into the United States in recognition of that protection zone. Whether or not trading partners will actually recognize that protection zone, I think hopefully we never find out, but you know, there's no guarantee that they would recognize that, but it is part of the international standards, and USDA has taken those steps. So beyond that, it's more theoretical about, if we were to have ASF in feral pigs in Georgia, for example, could we continue to export from the Midwest? I think that's the hope and that's the plan. You get a little bit more fine then if, for the example, if you had it in Oklahoma, could you still export out of Iowa? I think that's, I don't think we're there yet with the regionalization plans.
And I might add, and Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong, that decision is in the hand of the importing country. Nobody else. They get to decide. So if we have a problem, Japan gets to decide, or China gets to decide, or Mexico. And we're working real hard with Mexico to get a joint decision on regionalization. We have one with Canada, I think. Is that right? Yeah, we do have one with Canada. We don't have one with Mexico yet. But it's the buyer that gets to decide on this, and that's what's scary about it, because you pop up in Puerto Rico and somebody can say, well, we're just going to ban the whole United States, and we don't really have much recourse there other than to get it out of Puerto Rico. So that's the scary part. Aaron?
No, I was gonna ask, I am curious on the communication between the state vets and APHIS and how that's going, and whether AgView is being picked up fast enough. So we're really concerned too about movement stoppage.
Yeah.
So yes, as Steve mentioned, I mean, exports obviously get slammed in almost no matter what scenario. Mainland protection zone, I'm a little bit optimistic about, but mainland cases, it's complete stoppage. But also just the movement stoppage, we're concerned about. And so, I don't know, any more now on how state vets are coordinating and with APHIS, and whether AgView participation is coming along, because we can talk about regionalization and everything else, but as it happens, how that plan is playing out, so that we're not stopped for days, let alone longer. So just curious, any thoughts on that?
Sure. And one of the things we talk about all the time is we don't want to kill the industry killing the disease, but our job is not let the disease kill the industry. So we have regular discussions. We have a regular call with the National Assembly, which is all the state animal health officials and the USDA. There's several working groups. There's actually a new working group being formed to go through the Red Book and some of the pieces there. But there are regular, we've had it was around 15 states. All the swine states have been discussing for several years. Actually met, can't remember, 2018 in Indiana and had some of our first discussions. Because one of the questions usually comes up is we don't want states doing things differently. Sure, well, and our goal is to do things as the same, but I think a key point here is industries are different in each state too, and each industry in each state's going to drive that somewhat too. But we are working as hard as we can to unify those efforts, and that's why the triangle, and we talk about it all the time, and working with industry and getting things as aligned as we can now. But so we are having those discussions and are well aware of those things, because we absolutely don't want to stop movements for any longer than we have to. But I hope everybody understands that the key piece of that is those records and tying together AgView, because if we don't have it in Iowa at the very beginning, there's a good chance we may be getting it if we haven't already got it, the way pigs move. But if we have that opportunity to minimize the spread at the very beginning. But when I gave the example of avian influenza, I mean, a turkey site, they have 50 deaths one day, 100, 200 the next day, and the turkeys are all laid out. We don't have that luxury with ASF. And that's why it's going to be so critical that if anybody has any concerns, they report it early, because 14-day incubation period, and if it's at a site for a period of time and we've moved the animal around a long time, we're going to be way behind and playing catch up.